Hello. We have already produced the Dzindzi Indian DVD, D4, G6, C4, Bishop G7, Knight C3, C5, D5, and Bishop takes C3, BC, F5. So we have whole DVD on it, and very frequently White is not comfortable playing this opening, and there are several different ways they can avoid Dzindzi Indian. So, and this is going to be DVD on what do we do without getting to King's Indian or very old-fashioned opening. What do we do and how do we play when White avoids Dzindzi Indian? White can avoid several different ways. D4, G6. First of all, they can play E4. Well, if they play E4, we can go C5, we can go D6. Well, and that we cannot cover on this DVD every possible variation after this, but when White plays D4, G6, I want to follow with C4, and on Bishop G7, after D4 and C4, what do we do if White avoids Dzindzi Indian? They can do it several different ways. First of all, they can still play Knight C3, and when we go C5, now they can they can take on C5, B, they can go E3, and C, they can play Knight F3. All these moves, they do avoid Dzindzi Indian. So, but luckily for us, with the exception of a third move, E4, none of the, after C4 and C5, here is only one good move for White, and it's to allow Dzindzi Indian, because none of the other moves, they create any problems for Black, and Black gets very good game. Now, let's cover them one at a time. On D takes C, the move I like the best here is Bishop takes C3, B takes C, and the Queen A5. Now, the idea behind the Queen A5 move, of course, we don't want to take the C3 pawn, because after that, White is going to control the diagonal from A1 to H8. So we don't want to let Bishop to go on this diagonal sometime later in the game. Queen A5 is, we want to get the C5 pawn. We want to continue with Knight F6. We can go Queen A5 right away, or we can go Knight F6 if we want to stop the E4 temporarily, but White still can go F3 and followed by E4. On Queen A5, if White goes E4, we can go Knight F6, attack the E4 pawn, which has to be protected now. The best way is F3. Notice, because if White goes E5, then Black plays Queen takes C3 check. Now it's okay to take C3 pawn, because you also win the central pawn on E5. That's not good idea for White to give up the central pawns. So after Knight F6, F3, and basically the type of position we're going to get after Queen takes C5, suppose white goes bishop d3, d6, knight e2. So here is the setup for black. We don't want to dedicate too much time to this continuation, because it's not really continuation that is good for white. We're going to go bishop e6. Queen is going to go back to c7 when it's necessary. And then you can put the knight either on c6 or e5 or on d7 and c5. This is very, very good position. I think black has solid advantage here. And some moves like knight d4 shouldn't scare you, because this type of pawn structure is very, very good for black, because black has two knights in a closed position against bishops, and white has multiple weaknesses in the center. So now going back to the position where white has several choices. This is the position. They can go d takes c. On d takes c, as I already covered, bishop takes c3. We already mentioned that. And two other moves besides d5 are e3. The best way to play against e3 is not to take on d4. Go knight f6. Well, if you take on d4 and go knight f6, then d5 may be unpleasant. Now, we do go now knight f6. Anytime white takes on c5, black can go either queen a5, getting pawn back, or knight a6. Now, if white decides to play d5, I have to point here that you automatically getting either into the King's Indian or the Benoni type of position with a full extra tempo for black, because white did play e3 and then they play e4. So that's not the way to. White cannot just give black an extra tempo, and you will be gladly playing that position. Knight f6. Suppose white goes knight f3. Black would castle, and after bishop e2, well, now black can play d5. That will lead to Grunfeld, regular Grunfeld, or which is even better, to take on d4 and go d5 very next move. White has absolutely no advantage. This is reversed Tarrasch, whereas one extra tempo doesn't make much difference, and black is doing really very well. I had a game where white castled. I went knight c6. White played h3 to prevent bishop g4. I went bishop e6, and after c5, I'm putting pressure on c4, and after c5, knight e4. And after bishop e3, there is a simple tactical shot that gives black great position. D takes c, followed by d4. We get our piece back, and we get a sizable advantage, no matter what white plays here. Okay, so we get position, one of the possible positions where white has some choices to avoid Dzindzi Indian. So we just, on e3, we're going to go knight f6. We are doing just fine. We are okay against if white takes, and if white doesn't take and goes knight f3, then we can take on d4 now and go d5, or we can do it move later. Also, suppose white takes with a knight on d4. Then we can simply castle bishop e2, knight c6. This is going to transpose to the other position where white plays knight f3 on a fourth move, and I will be covering it a little later. This is at least equal position for black. And the last option in this position for white is knight f3. Last option to avoid, of course, the Indian. Knight f3 here, after c takes d, knight takes d4, and knight c6. This is another great position for black. You see, what white needs to do is to go e4 and bishop e3, which they cannot do, because right now they have to solve the problem of hanging knight. Knight takes c6 will give black very good pawn formation. Something like e3 will transpose you to the position we just mentioned in previous variation, the way it should be played. Knight f6. Oh, and if bishop e2, we simply gonna castle, and if white castles, here you're gonna have pleasant choice. My preference is to d5 move, open position, because white's bishops are not very active, especially the bishop on c1. And if c takes d, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and on bishop f3, queen c5. This is very good position for black, because after knight takes c6, bc, although white has a little better pawn formation, but you cannot compare after bishop a6 or bishop f5 activity of white's bishops. You cannot compare with black's bishop. It's like day and night difference. Black's bishops are absolutely dominating here. So this is a good way to play. So what, again, we go to the start position of this. So after c5, here is the position. On knight f3, after you take cd, you're doing very fine, and you're doing very fine after e3 as well by playing knight to f6. So what you're gonna do now, suppose white goes knight f3. Beginning now, you can take on d4 and go d5, and if white takes with the knight, then you go knight c6, following by d5 after castles, and black has very good position, absolutely no problems in the opening. So if white plays knight c3 on move 3, we are absolutely covered every continuation. We covered d5 as it transposes to the Dzindzi Indian, and we covered every other move, such as e3, knight f3, and d takes c. Well, but this is not the only way, of course, to avoid Dzindzi Indian. After bishop g7, the main move is e4. But before we go to the main move, I want also to cover knight f3 continuation. Well, the knight f3, we could go c5, and on d5, d6, and if white goes e4, we're gonna go e6. And this position we are not gonna cover here, because we're going to get 100% transposition when we cover third move in this position e4. When we cover this, then you will see that positions will be identical. So we will cover this as well. So on knight f3, we will go c5. We can go c5. And if white goes e4, we could go d6. And after d5, we transpose. Or we can take c takes d, transposing to Marozze bind position. That's entirely your choice. But the 6 continuations we will cover, and that will be in your disposal. Okay. Now, the main move that does not allow black to play Dzindzi Indian is the e4 move. And that requires us to play very precisely, unless of course you want to play d6 followed by knight f6, which is going to transpose to regular King's Indian. But if you, the reason why we have to cover different continuations, because if we wanted to play King's Indian, we should have started with King's Indian. So now let's avoid King's Indian and play against third move e4. Of course, black, besides going to King's Indian, they can go d6 or knight c6. So we cannot cover all the continuations. I would want to cover the one I'm going to suggest and analyze that one with various different possibilities for white. And I want to cover c5 move, and white has two moves, d5 move and knight f3. d5 is a little bit bigger chapter, so let's cover knight f3 first. After knight f3, there are two continuations for black. Main is queen b6. And don't forget that here you can play c takes d, knight takes d4, knight c6, transposing immediately to Marozze bind. So if you're comfortable with Marozze bind, there is a solution for you. But you don't have to. So there is, besides Marozze bind, there is queen b6 move, and there is queen a5 move, queen a5 check. Now, queen a5, I don't know which one I like better, but I don't mind playing queen a5. I analyzed this position recently with Ripka, and after knight c3, d6, now bishop e2, bishop g4. The best move is d takes c, d takes c, and when white castles, black can play bishop takes f3 and going knight c6, which gives approximately equal position. We're going to return to this later in a later on a DVD. So, but the main move I'm suggesting, it's more interesting move in this position is queen b6 move. Well, there are two continuations, knight c3, because d4 pawn is hanging, knight c3, cd, and knight d5, or simply d takes c. Well, let's see what happens on knight c3. Knight c3, we have to take on d4, and after knight d5 check, after knight d5, queen a5 check. Now bishop d2 is not a good move because we simply go queen d8, and white cannot capture the pawn because bishop is on d2. So on queen a5 check, b4 is correct move. Queen d8, knight takes d4. Now knight f6. White has to take on f6. Bishop takes. And now the normal move is bishop e3. But that's a good position for black because pawn is on b4, is overextended. We just castle, and on bishop e2 we go a5, and now a3 may be a bit dangerous because well, first of all, black can take on b4, take on a1, and go knight c6, attacking pawn on the way. Secondly, they can, in this position, simply go knight c6 right away. So b5 is a logical response, and d6, and after castle, knight d7. Actually, position approximately equal, but I like black. I like when knight can go to c5. Maybe later put the bishop on e6, or queen d7, b6, and bishop b7. I think black is doing just fine. So that is if knight f3 is played by white. So on knight f3, once more, we go queen b6, attacking d4 pawn, and after d takes c, that's another continuation. We simply play queen takes c5, and now white wants to develop bishop e2, d6, castle, knight c6. Black has no problems at all. On knight c3, black will gladly take on c3 and go knight f6, putting maximum pressure on those pawns, bishop e6, knight e5. And in order for white to conclude development successfully, they may try a3, bishop g4, b4, queen h5. And now it's just white's rook is hanging, rook a2 has to be played, and black has various different ways of take advantage of unnatural position of white's pieces. So they can go knight f6. Later on, they're going to take on f3. Rook c8, knight e5. Black has very good position. White's development is slightly awkward here. So that completely, in my opinion, that actually, not in my opinion, that completely covers knight f3 continuation here, well, you have queen b6. And let's look more of a queen a5 check, as I already mentioned. Now, if white goes bishop d2, then we can go queen b6. Now on knight to c3, d6, you see black keeps pressuring on d4. And on bishop e2, we go bishop g4. Move like d5 cannot create really big problems. Well, one opportunity is to take on c3, pawn takes, and go knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn. White cannot protect with bishop d3 because after queen c3 they lose. They don't have bishop d2 since d3 bishop is hanging. So this is not a bad option, and later you're going to take pawn on c3 and give white little initiative. So queen a5 is very possible. So if white doesn't play d5 and goes bishop e2, then we go bishop g4, and now white practically has to take on c5, because move like d5 will not be good now, because what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this knight first. Taking gf can be very bad because all dark squares are weak on a king side, and taking with a bishop will result in sacrificing of two pawns, and white still has problem castling. So I don't think white has anywhere near compensation anywhere near to 2 pawns. So that's not a good idea. So that leaves white with only one option. In this case, after bishop g4, that leaves white only one option, to take on c5, in which case knight comes to c6 and possibly to d4 square after taking white's f3 knight. That will completely cover knight f3 variation after c5. So if there is no knight f3, then what? Move like bishop e3 cannot be recommended. I think it's simply a bad move. First of all, black can go queen b6, attacking 2 pawns. Secondly, they can simply take on d4, bishop takes, and knight f6, followed by knight c6. And any kind of e5 move can be met with knight h5. And white is much worse here after knight c6. So that leaves white with only one move on c5, and that move is, in this position, d5. So we got to the position which is probably the most controversial position of anti-Dzindzian. And after c5, d5, we go d6, knight f3, e6. Most probable move is knight c3, and now e takes d. There are 2 ways white can recapture, of course. It's taking with a knight is not gonna result to anything, especially with well, we can go simply knight f6 here and then bishop e6 and take this knight, But if that is bothering you, then what we can do in this position, we can go knight e7 first and take on d5 the next move. But in most of the cases, white plays bishop e2 first. Well, again, or knight c3. So e takes d, as I already mentioned, knight d5 is not really a threat. So we have to analyze both types of pawn structure. After e takes d and c takes d. C takes d is a better move because after e takes d. Now, if we go knight f6, we're going to get typical mix of King's Indian and Benoni, whereas white is slightly better, but knight is on g8. Knight is on g8, which gives black an extra opportunity, as it was in Topalov's game against Timan. Topalov was black, and actually it's not Topalov's idea, but no matter what happens, in both cases, in all cases, black has very good position. Because the knight is on g8, black goes bishop g4, and on bishop e2, knight gets developed on e7. When both sides castle, you will see the difference now. Both sides castle, white played queen b3, attacking b7 pawn, b6. Now white played knight g5. Here is black's idea. Black wants to take the knight on f3 and go knight f5 followed by knight d4, having an advantage even. This is very strong position. So in this position already, bishop on g4, and thanks to our knight on e7, bishop takes f3 is very strong positional threat. And white played knight g5. So after bishop takes e2, knight takes e2, white got very bad game. Knight get developed on d7, queen h3, knight f6, and after bishop d2, h6, and on knight f3, g5. That's already big advantage for black. And what happened, quickly I'll tell you, now g4 is a threat, and after knight e1, and knight e1 has to be played because some move like queen g3 will get white in more trouble. So after knight e1, knight e4 was played, and on bishop c1, because b2 hangs and d2 hangs. And after bishop c1, f5 was played. Black is absolutely dominating here. And let's see a few more moves in this position. Queen d3 in this game, queen d7, rook b1, rook a to e8. And after b3, knight goes to g6. Bishop b2, bishop takes b2, rook takes b2, queen g7, and black is having very, very big advantage. Knight comes to e5, pawns will be advanced, and black won shortly after. This is very good example of taking advantage when white recaptures with the e-pawn. Now let's go back and see the correct capture, which is c takes d. And we will see that continuation. And again, the way we get it, the way we get it is d4, g6, c4, bishop g7, e4, c5, d5, d6, knight f3, e6, I don't know, bishop e2, or knight c3, doesn't matter. Bishop d3 may be played also. And here, after knight c3, e takes d. Let's see the c takes the capture. And after c takes d, it's a little more complicated, but still very playable, very interesting and playable position for black. a6, well, intending b5, a4. And there was a game between Kramning and Leko where h3 was played, and b5, and after bishop d3, knight e7, black got very good position and never had a problem. Maybe allowing b5 is wrong, so a4. Let's look at it. This is the most natural and almost standard response in those positions. Bishop g4, bishop e2, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and knight d7. You see, black gives up the c8 bishop. I have done it many times in different type of position with knight on f6, but with knight on g8, it's even better. This bishop on c8, if it was alive and white had knight on f3, it would have been on the way. There is no good way to develop it. Would have been congested with its own pieces. So after knight d7, white castles. Knight e7, bishop f4, knight e5, and after bishop e2, black can castle, and on queen d2, go f5. This is very dynamic play, and in my opinion, black has very good position. Now, if e takes f, knight will take on f5. Black's pieces perfectly placed and dominating the center of the board. So bishop g5 is probably the best move. Knight to f7. You see, we don't want to be pinned, and if bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, ef, gf. Now this position has to be evaluated as approximately equal. White has little better pawn structure. Pawn on f5 may be weak. Black has very powerful bishop on g7 and potentially of putting knight on e5, maybe f4 and knight e5. If I had to choose which side to play, I would prefer black. That does not mean black has advantage. Black does not have disadvantage, certainly, and I think black has a lot clearer game, which cannot be recognized as advantage, but it's easier to play game, and that's the kind of positions we normally looking for. So we covered almost every variation white can play, not allowing Dzindzi India. Now, suppose white goes g3 here, or suppose white goes knight f3, and on c5 white goes d5. Now, do we have to know, do we have to memorize all it, and do we have to remember exactly how to play? No, absolutely not, because we are not computers and we cannot memorize everything. Well, what we have to do, we have to understand how to play those positions. What we have to understand is this. If white plays knight c3, we go c5, and they go e3. We go knight f6, and then we take on d4 and go d5, having very good position. If white plays e4, we have to play c5, and now most probable move is d5, and our goal is to go d6, e6, take on d5, and in case they take with the e pawn, I know I made too many moves for black, but basically what we want to do, we go bishop g4, and we eliminate the knight that controls very important d4 square where what black knight is heading. So that's the idea. And if white takes with the c pawn, then what we have to do, we have to go knight e7, we have to stop knight b5, at some point go a6, and concentrate for f5, which will give us very good counterplay. And in some cases, we can go bishop g4 and exchange knight. White doesn't have to allow it. Then we just have to castle and go for f5. So those are the ideas you have to remember. Those are the ideas you have to know. And if you know these ideas, you can easily adjust yourself to any position you can get. Now, a couple of more things, a couple of more transpositions to different positions I want to mention. Suppose after d4, g6, c4, bishop, g7, suppose white plays here some move like f3. That's not the best move, but that's not punishable move. You cannot punish black for making this move. But the reason why this is not a good move, first of all, what's the idea behind this move? Behind this move, the idea is to play regular Zamish against King's Indian, and at the same time not playing knight c3 to provoke Dzindzi Indian. So f3, in a way, for people that like to play Zamish, is not a bad idea. How should we play not to allow Zamish, at the same time get different position, good position? Okay, first of all, a Zamish variation of King's has to be played against King's Indian, can be played against King's Indian. This is not the King's Indian yet, because black's knight is on g8, not on f6. So we will go c5, white will go d5, and we will do just like we did in other cases where white played knight f3 and knight c3. What we're going to do here, we're going to go d6, and after e4, we will go e6, and on knight c3 we will take, and assuming white takes with cd, which is most natural move. Now I want to point something to you. So what I want to point here is, if this was a regular Zamish, normally black's plan is eventually white plays this move. Black's plan is to go h5 after castle, knight h7, and go f5 to get the counterplay. However, in this position, we do not have to do that because our knight is still on g8. What we can do, we can go knight e7 followed by f5, or we can even go f5. Maybe we go a6 first, and after a4, go f5 followed by knight f6. So those are advantages of having knight on g8 yet. So we definitely have to go f5 right away, or knight e7 followed by f5. Not to mention, we also have a chance to go bishop h6, exchanging the r-square bishop. If black takes it, maybe we don't retake with the knight, but maybe we give check and then retake this bishop with the queen, putting queen on very good diagonal, and followed by knight to e7, which gives black very good position. So those are the advantages of keeping knight on g8 in most of the variations of this variety of, well, I don't even know what to call it. If we go, it's kind of variety of King's Indian with knight on g8 and putting knight on e7. Now, I want to introduce you to a couple of games that's been played on quite high level with the same type of positions, and after d4, g6, c4, bishop g7, e4, c5, d5, d6. I want to tell you the position after e6 and e takes d is very important for us to learn. And this, if white doesn't want to allow Dzindzi Indian, this is you're most likely to see this move order, and black has to come up with good counterplay plan. The first game, I want to bring this game to your attention. There's players both originally from Russia. They don't live in Russia. They are both grandmasters, Mikhailevsky and Milov. And this is very instructive game to see played with this variation. White played bishop d3 in this position, e6, knight c3, knight e7, knight f3, now e takes d, and c takes d. We already know what we do on e takes d. We're going to go knight f5, knight d4, with bishop g4 first, or even without bishop g4. Even bishop f5 is okay. So c takes d, a6, a4, stopping b5, h6, white castle, and g5. Now, what is the point behind h6 and g5? Black wants to play knight g6 and get full control on the f4 and e5 squares for their pieces. Now knight d2 was played, knight d7, knight c4, and knight e5. Now, if white takes on e5, black can take with the bishop, and they have very good grip in the center, and potentially they can organize attack on the king side. White played f4. That's a natural reaction. They try to open position a little bit. After f4, g takes f, and this is the position. Knight is still on e7. G takes f, bishop takes f4, knight 7 to g6. Just now he played knight g6, bishop g3, h5. And after h3, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, and the other knight goes to e5. And after bishop e2, queen g5. Black clearly has very strong initiative. They are okay in the center. They have centralized knight. They have potentials for attacking on a king side, and white did not organize any counterplay on a queen side. After bishop f4, queen g6, king h1, bishop d7. White played a5. And here, castle long is the best move. That's not what was played, but in the game, bishop f6 was played. White was reluctant to castle queenside, but castling queenside in this position, according with Ripka, gives black sizable advantage. What possible continuation is queen d2, rook dg8. Those are the best moves made by both sides, and black has an advantage. Queen e3, bishop h6. That's a good positional move. First of all, it opens the g file and exchanges dark square bishops. That's a good move. Rook g1, bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, king c7, knight a4, queen g3, queen takes g3, rook takes g3. Black does not have an attack, but they have good size, a positional advantage. Then there is a rook g8 will be, and rook e3 maybe, the rook b3 coming. Black's pieces totally dominate the board, and black has really big advantage here. Now, next game I want to show you, also played with the same opening, same pawn structure, and with white also played Vladimir Georgiev, another grandmaster, and he still had serious problem finding good play for white, and he too got into a lot of trouble and lost. Let's look at this game. d4 g6, c4 bishop g7, e4 c5, d5 d6, bishop d3, knight f6. This is a little bit different now. Knight f6 is played. Knight c3. But it's still important for us to see how black created the play. Knight c3 castle, knight g2 e6, castle ed cd. That will, black took ed, white took cd. This is knight bd7, bishop g5, knight e5, bishop c2 h6, and white played here bishop c1. So now they're planning for f4. If bishop goes to d2, there is a potential knight c4, and on bishop h4, black would probably go g5. So bishop c1. And here also, after rook e8, black got very strong initiative real quick. f4, knight c4, bishop d3, knight a5, knight g3, knight g4. And white is almost lost here. The idea, the threat is knight takes h2 followed by queen h4. There is also threat of bishop d4, and there is also threat of queen h4 right away. So after knight g4, e5, queen h4 was played. White has already no defense, and after queen h4, well, actually, h3 was played, and black went on to winning the game. But actually, Ripka recommended even stronger continuation. After e5, Ripka recommended d takes e, and now, well, bishop b5 is the best move, and now queen h4. We don't really have to go through all this game, especially with knight f6. It just shows you the type of counterplay black gets. But black gets even better counterplay if in the early stage of the game, knight goes to e7, followed by f5. There are a couple of more ways white can avoid Dzindzi Indian, and I want to mention them because they are important, and in both cases we get some chapters of widely popular English defense, English opening. But I would gladly go for those positions with black, and I think they are very good because they are not the best variations of the English opening for white. They both start with knight f3 move, and when we go c5, white can play a couple of different ways. We did mention that white can let black take on d4, but we look at e3, we looked at knight c3. Now look at knight c3 after cd, knight takes d4, and on knight c6, knight c2. We talked about this pawn structure. Now let me explain something, that in this particular position, this pawn structure is specifically bad for white. After queen a5, well, probably bishop d2, knight f6, f3 in my opinion is the best move, and now we're gonna go d6, and on e4 start immediately playing against this terrible weakness on c4, and white will have very bad position. And this is one variety of playing this position for white. And the other and more serious option for white is, after d4, g6, c4, bishop g7, knight f3, c5, just to go g3. But let me, and we're going to take, white going to take, and let's talk about this position. Here is the position of a regular English defense, that type of position that is known as a slightly better for white. We gladly go for this variation, but the way we play, that's not going to be the case, because after knight takes d4, knight c6, white has to do something with the knight on d4. Knight c2 is by far the best square to go to. Now we go knight f6, bishop g2, castled, and white castled. This position is known, it's because this position was known with white's move, and one of the options is knight c2. So we forced to play practically white to go knight c2, to retreat the knight at least. And this position is very good for black. We go queen a5. That's the way the theory goes. Knight c3, d6, and here best move according to theory is bishop to d2. Black plays queen h5. They want to start operations on the king side, and white goes e4. Now it's clear that if queens are exchanged here, well, black is going to fight, maybe not too hard, fight for equality, which is playable position. But here is this position you're likely to get. Here is very unusual tactics for black. Knight to g4, attacking h2 pawn, h3, and knight to e5. It seems weird that white did not want to exchange queens by taking on d1, but black didn't want to, and black will go for this position. Here's a couple of words about it. First of all, there is g4 move. h3 pawn is maybe hanging. c4 is definitely hanging. On g4, there is a good chance black can sacrifice a piece and potentially get very strong attack. And I don't think there will be too many volunteers for white to play g4. But after queen takes h5, g takes h with the bishop is on d2. Unexpectedly, white is losing the pawn because two pawns are hanging here. 1 and 2. If white goes b3 or even knight e3, black will play bishop takes h3. And because of a fork with knight f3, white cannot recapture on h3, and in case of f4, black simply takes and goes knight g6 or knight g4, followed by f5, on rook h1, for example, f5, having very, very strong position. This is unusual approach to exchange of queens, where we don't want to have good pawn structure, but if we get bad one like this, we're going to win a pawn. Well, here is the legitimate question. When we play c5 in this position, what if white goes d5? Okay, we're gonna go d6. And what if instead of e4, white decides to play g3? Now, we could go knight f6 and get to 100% regular King's Indian. And there is a way to play the same with a6. I have to tell you this. In my opinion, again, playing knight f6 is the best choice for black, because no player that knows very well ideas of King's Indian will play this variation for white. When black, in this position, after both sides castled, if black simply goes knight a6, knight c7, and tries for b5, they will have very good position. This is probably, out of all normal positions of King's Indian, this is probably the worst scenario for white. So when we go here c5, d5, d6, if they go g3, just go knight f6, just castle, and go knight a6. This is a very unpopular system for white, and the reason is they don't have much of a play. So it's not easy for them to organize good play in the center, and black may be able to play b5 really quick, and bishop on g2 to make two moves, and instead of developing on a normal square or d3, to make two moves and put it on absolutely dead diagonal is not a very good idea. This variation of King's Indian does not have too many followers for white. This is another option. And I want to, I have had it playing, when I was playing Dzindzi Indian a lot, so I've had people play against me some different weird varieties, but I've had also some people play knight f3, and on c5 they take dc now. Now, I didn't want to go queen a5 check, and I don't think you should. So there are two ways to play for black. I think the good way to play is knight f6. I don't think this pawn is going anywhere. And after knight c3, castle, or maybe even knight a6. Eventually you're going to get this pawn. There is also queen a5 move now, with strong positional idea knight e4. Eventually you can get this pawn anytime you want. And d takes c, well, I don't think black is entitled to get some advantage against it, but for sure that's not the kind of a move black should worry about. And after d5 we go d6, and here white kind of doesn't have waiting move, so black keeps the knight on g8. See, if white goes e4, then we go e6. And if white goes g3, then we go knight f6. If white goes knight c3, and after bc, we can go f5. And even though white avoided originally Dzindzi Indian, now they are in it. And bad variety of Dzindzi Indian. Knight on f3 does not stand well. As we know, the best variation is e4. It's like if white played knight f3. So this is also very playable and particularly good variety of the Dzindzi Indian. So this is 100% okay to play for black as well. And now, one, if you can call it a downside, I don't think it is really downside. After d4, if we want to play Dzindzi Indian, we must go g6 on the first move. And here, white may go e4, and after bishop g7, whatever move, they can play knight c3, knight f3. So we're going to be in some kind of variety of modern defense. Now, we cannot go now through modern defense, and I cannot tell you to play it, to start playing it as a regular opening for black. No, but I want to tell you this. After d4 and g6, not too many people will play e4. On d4, g6, a lot of people will play c4 because this is category of e4 openings now. And people that play d4, they want to stick with this category. In other words, they will go c4 or knight f3. And we're going to end up in one of the positions that we analyzed. However, e4 can be played. What I want to do, I want to walk you through the way to play this position that you don't get really bad game. So bishop g7, and now knight c3 or knight f3. How do we play here? Suppose knight c3 is played. After knight c3, I would recommend move c5. And it's known here that d takes c is the best move. Now, before we get to d takes c, let me briefly update you on d5 move. On d5, we're going to go d6, and white has to develop pieces on a king's side. If knight f3, what I would recommend is to go bishop g4. You go bishop g4 the first chance you get because you want to exchange light square bishop for the knight. You want to exchange it because you want to put knight on d7, and there is bishop on c8 with knight on d7 would not look very good. And also, if, for example, you exchange the knight for the bishop, bishop for the knight, what you're going to have is you're going to have some control on dark squares in the center. White is going to have very hard time making f4 and e5. Meanwhile, you prepare your play on the queen side. That's the plan. Now, I'm not covering, I want to repeat that, I'm not covering modern defense, but this variety, briefly as a plan, since probabilities are very low for this to happen, if bishop b5 check, I would recommend bishop d7, and after a4, knight f6, knight f3 castle. And if white castles, just go bishop g4 again. First chance you have to do this. More serious option and more kind of a dangerous option for white is d takes c. Now, on d takes c, bishop takes c3. I have played countless games with it. I cannot say black has a very good position, but black may be slightly worse, but it's a very playable position, and I think black is minimally worse. After b takes c, queen a5. But here is one little trick. If white plays knight f3, you don't take on c3 because you don't need that pawn. That will open the long diagonal, and you don't want to eventually bishop is going to go to c3, and this may be very dangerous. So you don't take on c3, and you don't take on c5, because after queen d4, because queen is hanging and the rook is hanging, you will be forced to take on d4 and get really bad position. Well, what you do in this position, after a move like knight f3, you simply go knight f6 here. And next move you want to take on c5. The plan, this is the plan. For example, after knight f6, white goes bishop d3, queen takes c5, castles, and you go d6. Now, you don't castle yet. You go knight c6, bishop e6, queen a5, queen c7. Then you go knight e5 possibly. And it's very playable position. I played so many games against very strong players, and it's very playable position. And now let's cover this move for white. Let's